Because I'm going to cut a slot in the top of the legs for this piece, this is the beam, I want to make sure its thickness is pretty consistent. So that's right on the money. That's within a few thousandths at each end. So I'm really happy with that. So my next step now is to cut the notch here in the top of the leg for the beam. I want the beam to stick up about 3/4 of an inch above the top of the leg. This is 2 3/4 wide, like all the parts. So we want the notch to come in here about 2 inches. So I'm going to set the height of the blade to 2 inches. Just get it in the ballpark. Close enough. All right, also I've got a backer here that's well used, but it'll work here. I need the backer because as the blade comes out the back side, I'm going to get some tear out if I don't have that backed up well. So I'm going to clamp this in place, so that should work there. So that'll keep that in position. And then I need a stop. So I want something that's fairly tall because it needs to support that. So that looks like that'll work all right. So I'm going to start in the middle and I'll just work my way out until the slot matches the beam. Now I'm realizing here this clamps in the way, so I think I'm going to move it over here. And then I'll use a second clamp to hold my stop in place. There we go. So that should work okay. So let's give this a go. Okay, so that looks great. I'm not getting any tear out on the back side. And I'm debating whether or not I want to be cutting all of these. I think what I'm going to do is just get to the right dimension with the stop. Actually, I want to be... There we go. I want to be cutting on the left side of the notch there. Okay, so I'm going to move that over a little bit. All right, so that fits nicely. It's maybe just a touch loose, but that'll be fine. When I make the rest of the cuts on the other parts, I'm not going to push quite as hard on this sled. So I'll finish these up. The next step on the legs is to lay out the mortise for the stretcher. I'm going to put it roughly centered between the bottom of the beam and the top of the foot here. So that dimension is almost 20 inches. I'm just going to say center this at 10. The tenon will be 2 1/4, so I'm going to come out 1 1/8 inches on either side of 10 inches. Just draw a line there and there. And then I also want to center, of course, the mortise this way. So I'll center the square on here. And then, so that's my center. I'll come out about 5/32 on either side. About like that. And then I'll set this square to make that mark from both sides there. And that doesn't have to be exactly 5/16. I just need 2 marks that are nowhere centered, so when I get to the slot mortiser I can center the bit on there. Now I need to transfer this information to the other legs and transfer those lines over like that. The next thing I want to do is lay out this taper at the top of the leg. I want it to come down roughly in this area, a little ways above where the stretcher is going to go. So let's say about 10 inches. And we want to come in, I don't know, maybe a half an inch out from the slot here. That would put it about there. Now I want to make sure these are consistent, so I'll use that to mark. Same thing down at the bottom here. So I'll draw the line, and just like before, I will bandsaw close to the line and then hand plane it to match. I've got the legs now. The top edges are tapered and all plane to match. So I'm going to plane the faces now. Next up is the stretchers. These are the parts that are going to have the tenons on the end of them that are going to be wedged into the legs. So these have been milled, they've come off the planer jointer. I will cut them to length and then we'll cut the tenons. I don't want to surface these with the hand plane until after I've cut the tenons, because I want them to be exactly the same size. And if I was to surface them with the hand planes, things might change just a little bit. So I'm going to go cut these and then we'll go to the table saw and make some tenons. I'm going to use the tenon jig to cut the tenons. So in order to do that, I first have to cut the shoulders. So I've got the sled set up here with a stop. Now the thickness of the part this is going into is, the leg is 3/4. And because this is a through tenon that's going to be rounded, I want to go an extra 1/8 of an inch past the surface. So I've got this stop set, so the distance from this side of the blade to the stop is 3/4 plus 1/8, so 7/8 of an inch. I've also set the depth. I've got my 5/16 thickness drawn on here. And I'm going to make a little test cut just to see that I've got the blade height set correctly. So now I need to cut the shoulders with the stretcher this direction. I need to mark off of here the dimension. So I'm just going to center that on there. Because everything's not guaranteed to be square, if I make this cut, it's possible it's not going to be aligned with these other cuts. And the last thing I want is a little notch there. So I'm going to, I could put a couple pieces of tape there. I'm just going to move this over a little bit. Just clamp it lightly. So I've got a very small gap there. I'm just going to move the fence or my stop over just a touch. Okay, and then we'll give that a shot there. This is the Delta tenon jig. There's a bunch of manufacturers, or I should say there's probably one or two manufacturers, and different companies label them. First thing I need to do is loosen this and center this on my stock here. And then I'll just turn that. And I always want to make sure that I'm sitting flat on the table there. By loosening this and loosening this whole thing slides back and forth. So I want to get it roughly in the ballpark here. And I have my original test cut down here for the width. So that'll get me close to my starting point here. Over. So once I'm close, I'm going to tighten this smaller handle, which locks this to the slider part of this. And now when I turn this, I get a micro adjuster. So I want to, I'm going to start with this a little bit big. I'm always pushing this way because there's play in this thing. So I'll push it that way, and then I'll tighten that up, and I should be ready to go. One last thing I need to do is set the height of the blade. And that looks okay. So we'll get started here. To trim the tenons to width, I'm going to use the bandsaw. All right, the tenons are cut, and I need to round the corners so they fit in the mortises. Also, we've got a little bit of material down here at the base of the tenon, so I'll clean that up with a chisel. I'm just going to run my chisel along the edge here. And that usually cleans that up. To round the corners, what works best is a rasp, a fine pattern maker's rasp. So what I want to do first, I'm going to chamfer the corners at about 45 degrees. It's just easier to see what I'm doing. So that looks pretty symmetric. Maybe a touch more here. Trying to get down to the shoulder. Now remember, I left a little material there that I'm going to trim off later. That material, as I said earlier, kind of helps make sure I keep things even, but it also protects the shoulders from the edge of the rasp or the file. So that's another nice reason to leave that material there. So now that I've got these edges chamfered, I will now round Okay, that looks good. Now I can't file or rasp all the way to the corner, so now I will trim off that little bit of material there. So I'm going to come in from both sides here. Oops. And clean that up. And to get all the way down to the bottom here, I need to come in with my chisel just to get that corner nice and clean there. Notice I'm using a chisel that's narrower than the width of this to help avoid me dinging up the shoulders there. So that's looking nice and clean. So I'll flip it around, do the other side. Okay, let's see how this fits. All right, I like that. And okay, now there we go. So I've got a clean shoulder too. That's want to make sure that that fits nicely when it's pushed in all the way around. So that looks good. I've got all the tenons rounded now, and I need to make the kerf for the wedge to go into. So I've got my square set up for just a little less than 1/4 of an inch. So this will draw a line right at 1/4. So I don't want that too wide, because remember this has to actually move or bend when we've got this installed in the mortise. We put the wedge in, so I'm just going to make a kerf. Want to go almost down to the shoulder there. Okay, so I'll do that on each one.